I'm author and critic David Agranoff. I'm a horror and science fiction author, critic, and researcher. In this podcast, I wanted to provide in-depth interviews and panel discussions with everyone from New York Times bestselling authors to researchers, musicians, and anyone I find interesting. Welcome to Postcards from a Dying World. Hello and welcome to another episode of Postcards from a Dying World. I haven't done a panel in a long time, and you guys are probably wondering where the hell Issa's been, because he's on the show all the time, but we haven't been on in a long time, and I don't know where Issa is from day to day anyways. So, but I want to explain a little bit. If you saw my Stephen Graham Jones episode, maybe you know this, but the reason I haven't done a lot of episodes lately is I kind of took an unofficial hiatus from the podcast because for two projects have been taking up my time. One is I'm working on the sequel to The Last Night to Kill Nazis. And thank you very much to everyone who bought it, because it's in the 6th printing. And now, which is good news. And then Clash greenlit a sequel. So I'm very stoked on that, but I'm 30,000 words into that and ass deep in researching World War II spycraft, which kind of helped watch for the topic of today a little bit. And the other thing I got going on is that on Tuesday nights, 6 o'clock Pacific time and 9 o'clock on the East Coast, we are doing live episodes of my other podcast, the Dickheads podcast, where we interview Philip K. Dick related guests. And we do this live every Tuesday, and then all the Dickheads hang out and talk about whatever is current in the second hour. We just hang out. But that first hour we have guests. And so we have all kinds of crazy, like we have a guy who's growing computers, like brains. He's growing brains to be quantum AI computers this week. And he named his company after the Philip K. Dick novel Valis. And so we have all kinds of weird and interesting guests. So the point there is that every Tuesday you can check out who we've got going on. So if you follow Dickheads on any of the social medias, you can find out who the guests are upcoming. And so there's all kinds of interesting guests. Sometimes it's just collectors and different things. It's all sci-fi related. So please come by and check that out. Now, that being said, you haven't seen Issa in a while because we haven't done a Star Trek breakdown in a while, and we haven't done an unproduced screenplay episode. All these regular things that I do, the Science Fiction Hall of Fame series, all that will return when I get more of a handle on the novel that I'm working on right now. But right now, that's taking up a lot of my time. So I got to get that to Clash, and once that's there, we'll be having more episodes like this. But I could not pass up the opportunity to talk about Andor because it rules, and it was so good. And also, every time I post anything about Andor, like a million people talk to me about it, and like I'll get notifications like, you have 5,000 views on Threads. I don't even know that 5,000 people look at Threads, but you know, it's there. But I've got a really awesome panel here today. A lot of you already know Issa, so I'm going to start with Issa, who is a regular on this podcast. He is a recovering musician. He spent many years touring the world with the famous hardcore band Good Clean Fun.
So famous.
Yeah, and wrote and directed a movie with the same title, and is a screenwriter and a computer nerd and sees more movies than any human being I know. So welcome back to the podcast, Issa.
Well, thanks, Dave. David, in my free time, I had this great joke worked out, but I totally blew it. But in all my free time during the podcast hiatus, I've been seeing even more movies.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you have.
We'll just back that up and edit that out. It's fine.
Probably won't, but that's okay.
It's good to be back.
It's also a reunion of sorts for three of us, because Issa and my next guest and I watched the solar eclipse together last year in Indiana. So we hung out for one of those cosmic events. Mr. Dave Woken is a history librarian, and he curates. How would you? Was it Latin American or what?
Yeah, so I'm a librarian at the University of Chicago, who basically I'm in charge of all the materials from Latin America in the University of Chicago library system. But I also was, when Dave and I met, I was a PhD student at Indiana University studying Latin American history, and specifically focused on revolutionary movements. I was looking at early 20th century anarchists in Argentina, but have a really broad interest in revolutionary social movements and social movement theory. So.
So you can see why I invited him on this panel.
And I'm a big science fiction fan too. So,
Big
well,
science fiction
not
fan.
as big as Dave or Issa probably, but pretty big.
Well, and you also know shitty movies really well too. You're a connoisseur of shitty, trashy movies as well.
Well, and not
Yes.
only did we see the eclipse together, but we also saw a movie together.
Yeah, what was
True.
it? Monkey Man.
Monkey Man.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, Monkey Man. We saw together, which was elevated by the people I went to see it with, and really than anything. And my final guest to introduce you to today has also been on the podcast before, twice before. Alma Katsu is the well, I think her what I really want to start off with is her book was a question on Jeopardy last week. So one of her books, which was pretty cool. I gotta say, Alma, that was pretty cool, right?
It was. I was watching Andor when it happened, and somebody texted us to tell me, and we kept watching Andor, and then eventually someone sent me a clip of it, and they didn't get the answer right. I have to say the question right. So it was pretty cool, but yeah, I was watching Andor.
Yeah. Alma is the author of the novel in question is The Hunger, which was a historical horror novel about the Donner Party. And you were on this podcast before for your spy thriller, Red Widow, which has been optioned by FX, right?
Well,
you know, I know how that world goes, believe me.
Like, but we've got some other things going on.
Okay. But Red Widow is
Amazon.
Right, and Red Widow is a spy thriller, which is a world you know because you are a former CIA analyst, correct?
Not only CIA, also NSA. I had decades-long career in intelligence, and I'll talk about some specifics that that I saw in Andor. I can talk about some very specific experiences that have shaped but I have to say in all other ways, I am not worthy to be on this episode because I am not a Star Wars junkie. I saw the early episodes because I'm very old. So I saw them when they first came out. But, I'm short on that. I'm not a science fiction nerd, and I don't even get to see a lot of movies. So I will just talk about the tradecraft stuff.
Well, but yes, but you're bringing an interesting perspective to it, and that's why I was so stoked when you agreed to be here. But you also bring storytelling to it, so don't think that you don't have more to say. You're a great storyteller, and you have a new novel coming out soon. You want to tell the folks about? Fiend. Yes, I have not read Fiend yet. I put in a request for an arc for it, so.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's coming out September 16th. It's my first contemporary horror. And the short version, I tell people it's Succession, but with horror. But it's really so much more than that. But it's really looking at the super rich and the evil things they do. And why don't we see the evil things we do for what they are? Do you have to have something supernatural hit you in the face to make you see that they're doing evil things?
All right. Well, you already answered the first
question. Sorry, can I just take a second and tell Alma my amazing Donner Party story?
Sure.
It's really fast. When my oldest daughter was 9 years old, we went on a cross-country train trip from, the fun part is from Denver to San Francisco. And of course, we went through Donner Pass. And so I told her the story and she thought that I was making it up. So I was like, ask anybody. So she ran around the train car asking people, is it true that people ate each other here?
Did they know? Because when I went on tour, and this was 2018, I was shocked at how many people did not know about the Donner Party. They used to teach
Maybe
school.
the people on that train are more are not
Let's
the
hope.
average sample,
Yeah.
but people knew about it. It was
And
very entertaining. Sorry.
I actually have a Donner Party tie-in that I grew up near where they started.
Wow.
Oh, okay.
Where did they start? No one hears that.
Springfield, Illinois.
I have no Donner Party connection, so I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That you'll admit
Springfield,
to.
Illinois.
I have read Alma's book and it's on my shelf behind me, but other than that, that's my only connection. And by the way, I do want to shout out that book. It is incredible, and it was that was your kind of, you'd already done a couple novels, but that was like your big breakout book, right?
It definitely was my breakout book. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's when I first when you were first on my radar. Was I thought it was really cool that you were doing historical horror. So
Yeah.
which is great. So you already answered a little bit of your Star Wars background. Issa, why don't you give folks your Star Wars background, F and Dave, and then I will go.
Sure. I've been accused of being a Star Wars nerd, but I'm really not compared to most people that I know. I enjoy the movies. I've watched some of the TV shows. I haven't watched the cartoons really. I've read, a handful of the books. I read the Heir to the Empire series and Splinter of a Mind's Eye when I was a kid, and maybe one or two others, but I don't even think so. So that's my level of fandom. I'm a fan, but I'm not. I don't dress up like a stormtrooper or anything, and that's about it.
F and Dave.
Sure. Well, as the what do you want to call it? Elder millennial, young Gen Xer I am. I grew up with Star Wars. Had lots of Star Wars toys growing up, and still enjoy and watch most Star Wars stuff. Although I've never been big on extended universe stuff other than I guess the Knights of the Old Republic video games, which are excellent. And generally find fan culture quite annoying. I'm sure me saying that will really anger some people, but
no, the fan culture in Star Wars is dreadful.
It's it's to the point where I hate the fact that I have opinions about Star Wars, and I do.
Right. It is very hard to when there's people that have their entire careers around just like bashing like the Star Wars theory guy. Like all he does is complain about Star Wars and he makes money doing it. And supposedly a fan, right? It's painful. So I am definitely the biggest Star Wars nerd here. Clearly. I have Empire Strikes Back in the theaters, the first movie I remember seeing. Which was interesting, but that the whole I Am Your Father was the first time I ever remember being shocked by anything. And then so I go way back, but I have read many of the books. I've watched all the cartoons. I watched The Acolyte. I watched Skeleton Crew. I watched all of it. So
I'm close up there with you on those, dude. I've seen those as well.
Yeah. And I'm not a hater. I mostly enjoy those. I haven't quite finished the Star Wars Tales of the Underworld, which came out last week, which is an animated shorts. But I will say that those animated shorts are following up the story of the Star Wars novel Dark Disciple, which was supposed to be Clone Wars episodes. They wrote the scripts for Clone Wars and then they ended up not producing them and they turned it into a novel. And I think the Dark Disciple storyline is the best love story in Star Wars. And it's only in that book, in that novel. And that is the love story between Quinlan Vos and Asajj Ventress, which is a love story between a Sith and a Jedi who was meant to infiltrate the Sith. And I honestly think it's the best love story in Star Wars. So I want to shout that out. But, shout out to the novels, to the novelists. They don't usually get a ton of credit, but and I also last year, I will say, I moderated a panel with a bunch of tie-in authors at StokerCon last year. And so I got to meet a couple of the Star Wars authors, and I got to hear some hilarious stuff about the behind the scenes and how they work on those novels, especially those High Republic novels where they had a writer's room and developed the whole world together, which actually ended up producing pretty good stuff. But regardless, we're here to talk about Andor. So the backstory there, and for any, I can't, if you didn't watch Andor, you should not be watching this panel. The end of the story. So if for some weird reason you got to this point and you have not watched both seasons of Andor and Rogue One, we're going to spoil the shit out of them. And like my first initial thing that I think I want to go around and get everyone's take on is especially I want to start with Alma. Like, you say you're not a Star Wars person. How did you end up watching Andor? Was it people telling you like, hey, this is Star Wars for grown-ups, or this is really smart Star Wars? How did that happen?
I wish it were that pretty. No, I think we didn't have, my husband and I do not agree on TV very much. So, we often have a hard time settling on a TV show. And I think we were going through a drought and that was coming on. And I said, oh, well, let's give it a try. And, it was excellent right off the bat. So once we saw it, there was no question of it. But I think we went in pretty blind.
Yeah. So had you not seen Rogue One then before?
We had seen Rogue One. I sort of remembered it. I remember Diego Luna, of course, but maybe not the whole story. And of course, my husband has no memory. So it just was like a whole new day for him.
Right. Yeah. And for me personally, Rogue One is like my second favorite Star Wars film. And it was kind of designed for me because, as the author of The Last Night to Kill Nazis, you can imagine I love World War II mission movies, and Rogue One is a Star Wars version of a World War II mission movie. It might as well be, it's the Star Wars Guns of Navarone, right? So it was like designed in a lab for me. It had Ghost Dog and Donnie Yen in it, and like I was in the bag for Rogue One from the beginning. F and Dave, where does Rogue One stand in your list of Star Wars?
I don't really do lists like that anymore, but it's high up there. I really enjoyed it. For a couple of reasons. I mean, I think like it's just a good ripping sort of yarn of a story, like a good adventure that doesn't get bogged down. Well, okay, I rewatched it last night and I had forgotten how riddled with kind of annoyingly winky, you know, wink and nudge kind of moments there are in there. But on the other hand, it doesn't get bogged down in them and it doesn't get bogged down in the lore and really just sort of tells a story. And it's also part of my favorite kind of Star Wars, the Star Wars that actually recognizes that it's in a whole galaxy with lots of stories and isn't just the same stories of the same family doing the same thing over and over and over again. I don't, the type of history I studied, I will say this about Andor. I was excited for it because I had enjoyed Rogue One, and I love Andor more than Rogue One, and in fact think Rogue One suffered after watching Andor. I liked it
Right.
less.
Yeah.
In both cases, though, I will say, like, this has to do with, I guess, like personal philosophy, mentality, and also intellectual training. I like to say to folks, Andor is the Star Wars from below I've always wanted, following from the concept of history from below, which is broadly what you could say the kind of work that I and the guys I studied under in my PhD practice, the history of everyday folks, of the regular functioning of societies, social histories, demography, but also stories of social movements, and not just the stories of great men or politicians. The stories of the guerrilla fighters, the mid-level bureaucrats in the empire trying to keep them under control. Like makes a much more interesting story to me than yet another story about the same monarchical ruling families and religious leaders that you usually get out of Star Wars.
Well, right, and I would argue too that in a little bit, you're probably going to laugh at me, but Skeleton Crew, I would say, also does that a little bit because it's from the point of view of children.
Yes.
And
Skeleton Crew also embraces being fun, which too much Star Wars forgets.
Yes. And I personally loved Skeleton Crew, and I loved the whole Goonies and Star Wars aspect to it. And whenever people would complain about it and say it's just Goonies and Star Wars, I'd be like, well, what's the problem? I do not I detect no problem with that. And I thought the show was cute, and the kids were adorable in the show, so I thought it worked. Issa, where does Rogue One rank for you?
So I have to back up a second and say that I made a mistake watching Andor because I did not realize that season 2 ended on the heels of Andor, the same way that Rogue One ends on New Hope, which was kind of a nice symmetry there. But I watched the finale and then I didn't have time to watch Rogue One today. And what's worse is I kept while I was watching the last couple episodes, I was like, how are they going to wrap this up in one more episode? This is so crazy timeline wise. And so I was convinced that there was going to be like all this weird stuff that was going to happen. And I was like, what is going on? And it was very disconcerting to not understand the pacing. And so that kind of freaked me out. But I really enjoyed it. I remember Rogue One enough that it's, there's nothing super surprising in there. But yeah, I liked Rogue One a lot. Same thing. I love those World War II mission movies. And I also love that it was different than the Skywalkers doing their thing. So yeah, it's I feel like I want to have a list, just to make up for Dave not having a list, but it's hard to there's so much to Star Wars that it's hard to like take individual pieces and say this is number one, this is number two, aside from Empire Strikes Back obviously being number one and then everything else.
Well, and that's the debate I always have is whether Rogue has taken over Empire, because I don't think that you can undo the feeling that you had when you were a kid watching Empire Strikes Back in the theater. For me, that's how I feel about it. But at the same time, like, and I don't hate the prequels as much as some people do. I realize I see their flaws. I know their flaws. But one of the things that I think the prequels did was that I think it made Return of the Jedi a better movie, because when I saw Return of the Jedi as a kid and Luke's like appealing to Darth Vader, like, I know there's still good in you. I'm like, you moron. There ain't good. There's nothing good in Darth Vader. And then after watching the prequels, I thought like there's more to Darth Vader's regrets and all that because of the prequels. Now, what Andor does for Rogue One is there's a lot of things where obviously it deepens the characters, it deepens the things, but I will tell you, it also hurt Rogue One in a very specific way for me, which is when Andor has Galen Erso in his sniper scope and doesn't shoot him. I was like, that's not the Andor I know. Yeah, he's going to take him out, and he does not care. And he is not going to appeal to that. And that was the one thing that I just could not reconcile.
Okay, so as the guy who didn't have time to watch Rogue One again, didn't he not shoot because the daughter was there with him?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but do you think the Andor in the show would have really cared?
I don't find that too hard to believe. I mean, I feel like he had a couple shots at
now there is an argument that Jen Erso missing her father reminds him of his sister that he never found. So there is that argument, but I just think like they did such a good job on the show of presenting Cassian as a guy who was going to do whatever it took, and it did not matter. And anybody got in his way, he was going to take care of business. And so that's one of the things that, but at the same time, I will tell you the one scene that changed, it was a little thing, but Andor changed the ending of Andor when he meets the contact and the rings, and the guy first says Galen Erso's name for the first time, and Diego Luz is like, Galen Erso. It's like, it made it more like, oh shit, that's why he did it, because he, that's a name he was told, right? And so there was that. But I guess we can come back to Rogue, but I will say just a little bit on the first. I mostly want to focus on the second season, but the first season, I think the Aldhani heist was really like, that was the mission thing, but to see the ground up of like where the resistance movement started in all these little tiny ways, and to get a whole season of it, and to show, for example, like mass detentions and arrests over nothing. There was, obviously there's a lot that, and Tony Gilroy has said, he says over and over again, I was not writing this with the newspaper open. That it goes from the history. But is there anything from the first season that anyone on this panel really wants to address before we really break down what happened in the second season?
I mean, I would like to go. Oh no, yeah. I mean, I was going to say, I think that is the value. Well, the two things. There's the value of following one person's story to sort of understand some element of how this movement comes to be. But also how complex, like it gives the Rebel Alliance an actual, there's some texture to it. I still think it's frustratingly vague. I find Star Wars, I wish Star Wars had the level of political and historical like sophistication Star Trek did, because I think there's a lot more that could have been done about different factions in the Rebel Alliance and stuff like that, and being clearer about what drives people to resist the Empire. On the other hand, you get hints of that, and they're all over, like the roundups, like the. But also, I think there's this really frustrating thing out there. I don't think there is, of people, a kind of, I don't know, what is it, media literacy, revisionism, whatever, of people starting to say, wait a minute, the Empire's not so bad. And I like this show that went, no, they're really, really, really bad, and like laid it out for you, right? That like the people being worked to death to build a mega weapon, like that sequence is incredible. And it, to me, I always describe it as almost like a picaresque story more than anything, the first season of Andor. It's one guy wandering from one situation to another, and you're seeing different aspects of how the Empire is oppressing people in all kinds of different situations, whether it be this kind of scavenger mining, whatever kind of industrial place where we start in Ferrix, or a luxury resort, right, where people are getting rounded up for their political beliefs. Everybody's getting beaten down, and you see how someone could go from being a kind of something like a skilled thief with a personal vendetta to becoming a revolutionary. Like it walks you through how that would happen. Yeah.
Yeah. And Tony Gilroy said that he wrote the opening scene in the treatment with Cassian killing two Imperial officers in a brothel because he thought Kathy Kennedy, there was no way she would say yes to the project, because he was afraid to get involved in Star Wars. And he thought, if I write a opening murder in a brothel, that Kathy Kennedy will definitely say no. And when she said, yes, let's do this, he was like, oh, okay, shit, now I got to do it, which is funny. Issa, anything from season one that you want to come in?
This is actually kind of a comment on season 1 and 2, but as you know, about not writing with the newspaper open, I feel like the problem is the other way, that the like they show some people embracing the emperor or the empire and running towards it, but like apparently reality has shown there will be way more people doing that, and so it's a little like, it's like we're dumber than Star Wars, like it's almost like you come up with the most, it's like the movie Idiocracy, right? You come up with the most ridiculous thing that you possibly could. No way could this ever be reality, and now here we are, so that sort of, in a way, that sort of took away from the show for me, because it's like not only these people would be even dumber, and that was I wish that there was I wish that wasn't true, obviously, but I found that to affect my viewing.
Yeah, and we'll get more into the actual details of the show when we do season 2. But Alma, anything on season 1 that you wanted to bring up?
No, I really wish I had spent a little bit more time today sort of thinking season 1 through. I just remember, as season 2 was unfolding, just being very impressed about how they were widening the scope and making those connections to what actually happens in an insurgency when you're in a situation like this. Really connecting the dots for people, because as I heard, my husband loves to watch YouTube commentary. So as we were watching all this YouTube commentary on Andor, and I'm listening to these people, kind of give their view, But I saw that, yeah, they really did connect those dots so much more. It's a little hard for me because, I've spent so much time in this area for work, and I've seen actual insurgencies and civil wars and that sort of thing. And so it's almost, you take it for granted. Oh yeah, these are the steps that are going to happen, and this is how an evil autocrat's going to behave. And you sort of, but even I didn't make all the connections that some of these commentators were able to make. So I just have so much respect for the story that Tony Gilroy was able to write in 2 seasons. It's just amazing. Just some of
Yeah.
the best storytelling I've ever seen.
Well, and Tony Gilroy, one of the things, like all the writers on the, said that everything went across Tony's desk at the end. And I will say that Tony Gilroy has given many interviews in the last 2 weeks, and they're all over YouTube and the internet. And this guy has listened to almost every single one of them. So, and I will tell you that the writing advice and the storytelling advice is next level for the things. And some of it's not coming directly from Tony, it'll be some of the other writers on the show, which was, and one of the writers, the guy who wrote the last arc, he was the only one that was like a big Star Wars fan before he got hired. And Tony Gilroy said, "Hey, listen, I know you're a Star Wars fan, but I just want to let you know that our philosophy around here is don't look at what toys you get to play with in the toy box. Think about which toys you get to put into the toy box." And I thought that was great advice.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to listen to some of those interviews. And after season one, I did a piece for IO9 on what Andor gets right about international intrigue and, running a spy network and all that kind of stuff. So I was watching season two with that same eye. And I have to say, I wasn't as pleased. I know we'll get into all this, I'm sure. There were two mistakes they kind of made, which they
Oh
didn't
yeah, hit
make
us,
the
Alma.
first
Come
season.
on, no, we want to hear this.
Well, very spoilery and probably a little too geeky. Well, one I had to ask you about, uh, in a text because I don't know if you want to jump to that right
Yeah,
away.
yeah, yeah. We can get to that. I mean, it's far ahead in the story, but that's fine. I mean, we're well. Actually, you know
Let's
what?
do
We'll
it.
come back to that
I
one. I know
can't
which one
wait.
you're
Say,
talking
Now
about.
I have to wait. Great.
Yes,
I'm so curious.
it's about Luthen and
and
Lori.
Lonnie.
So in the story, like, well, yeah, and Luthen is a character, and I just want to say that Luthen is obviously one of the best characters that this show has added to the mix. But I think also the writing of Mon Mothma and all that was done really, really, really well. But
Good.
that Luthen speech in season one, where he talks about everything he has to sacrifice, and it's one of the best monologues in Star Wars. And it's funny when Stellan Skarsgård, who's an actor who's been working his whole life, said that but before he filmed that, he was so nervous because he was like, I can't fuck this up. He's like, I got to get this one right. you know and that one relates to what we'll be talking about. But let's start with talking about the first arc. So the first arc is a really interesting one in season 2, which was where we get the migrant farm workers, and that issue. But we also have the second season opens with Cassian stealing the TIE fighter, and that was definitely, Tony Gilroy has said that he wanted to put Star Wars right in your face because of all the people who said that it's not actually Star Wars. Like, he was annoyed by people saying it's not that Star Wars. So he wanted to put a TIE fighter in the very first scene. And just to kind of establish, like, yes, this is the Star Wars universe. But that first scene is fantastic, where Cassian has to give a pep talk to the woman who's going to help him steal this TIE fighter. And you get to see Cassian's very hushed version of what Luthen did for Lonnie in season 1. And I thought that was a great introduction to the season. Did anybody have any comments on that episode?
I was actually super worried from that TIE fighter scene. I was like, oh no, I mean, not to overthink it as I was watching, but it was like, oh no, they've decided to go more normal Star Wars. But like like the speech was great, the conversation was great. When he went to steal the ship and flew backwards by mistake, I was like, this is silly. Like that was too much. The ship's like bouncing around. Like I was just like, is this Galaxy Quest all of a sudden? Like I was very worried a few minutes into Andor because of that. But then it righted itself very quickly.
Yeah. And then when he gets the TIE fighter off the planet, we get to what we find out is Yavin, but we don't know that's Yavin yet. And the kind of bumbling um, rebels that are on the planet. And I got a special request from author James Reich, who was like, "You're going to talk about those idiots on the planet, right?" And I said yes. But one of the things that Tony Gilroy has said in interviews is that those guys were partially to show how discombobulated the rebellion was at that point. How like they're infighting, they're idiots, they don't know what they're doing, because this happens in revolutionary movements from time to time. And to put it specifically on Yavin was kind of a neat Easter egg for those of us who recognize the temples and all that. And then so and we know this. I will admit, when I was watching it, I had the thought like, this is going on too long. And I do think some of that could have been shortened, just from a storytelling perspective. Just like I think that episodes 10 and 11 could have been one episode, for example. There are little things like that that I definitely found with this season, but overall, the writing was so good. I'm not gonna complain overall. But that first arc, what then happens is we not only have the bumbling idiots on within the movements. We know from the first season, Saw Gerrera mentioned like the different factions, the human, the different factions that were going on. And what's funny is the cartoons touched on this with Rebels as well, and it was interesting just to see that whole, to get a crystallization of that, where they're fighting with each other. They don't even know how to get off the planet. And Cassian just has to like get out of there. Right. But he eventually comes back. But then we have like the Margaret farm workers and all that. But Alma, I want to talk to you about one thing that gets introduced there is Gilroy does the Star Wars version of the what's the name of that meeting the Nazis had for planning the final solution? Yeah, we're all brain farting the name.
Sorry.
Yeah, but the Gorman massacre, by the way, and this is what's amazing, is that Andor, the super adult Star Wars TV show, building this whole arc of the Gorman massacre, which was something that was first mentioned on the Rebels cartoon. The Gorman massacre is the reason why Mon Mothma left the Senate in Rebels, the cartoon, right? And it was mentioned many times that she gives her speech that is talked about in the show on the cartoon. And what's amazing is Tony Gilroy took this event that was mentioned on a cartoon and put it in Andor, this super serious episode. And if people want to watch the episode that relates to Mothma leaving the Senate, it's episode 18 of season 3 of Rebels. And it's just hilarious because, that he's paying off this cartoon, but this whole scene where they sit down and they have this imperial meeting where they over lunch like plan to destroy a planet, right? And I'm sure it's happening a lot in DC right now, but we're having a lot of these these lunches are happening. But when the two advertising guys get up and like, here's how you make the Gormans look terrible, right? What is everybody's thoughts on that, starting with Alma? Like, what was your reaction to that episode and that whole scene?
I've been in a lot of interagency meetings for the government like that. That was maybe a little more coldly efficient than most of them. I mean, you have a little more infighting. But that is definitely, if you're looking to like overthrow a government, not that I've been involved in those types of things, right? But you do have these steps and you do talk about things that to most people I think are pretty bizarre, like, I mean, as a social media researcher, which was towards the end of my career, we certainly saw that coming at us, right? I'll just say foreign adversaries having disinformation campaigns, geared to destabilize a government and an adversary's government. So, definitely these things are out there. In the case of the social media disinformation campaigns, it's a lot more ad hoc. It's not two slick guys in suits throwing out just a couple ideas, right? It's platoons of people throwing a lot of spaghetti at the wall and just trying to see which ludicrous thing is going to resonate with the population, and then that gets amplified. So it's a different way, but certainly all those components would be there in that interagency meeting.
So that meeting that rang true to you, like watching
well, they
that?
were very well disciplined. Usually you would have maybe a little bit more competition between different agencies over, whose plan was really going to carry the day or something like that. I guess that is a testimony to Krennic's, forceful personality. Hey, I wanted to, if I could just circle back to one thing though. So you say that that whole Mothma thread, which is very pivotal to, season two, right? That's like the crescendo that things move on, was really just kind of a throwaway. And it makes me wonder, I mean, did they have like a big giant Star Wars Bible that they handed to Tony Gilroy so that he knew what he had to, what hooks he could play off of?
Yeah, so there's a guy who's in charge. His name is Pablo Hidalgo. He's the guy who's the ultra uber nerd who is in charge of all the entire like canon and history of Star Wars. And when they did their writers' room in London, they actually had Pablo there. And he was in the room to like say yes or no to things. And I've seen interviews where Gilroy has talked about, like, I saw an interview where they asked him about the TIE fighter, and a guy said, and the interviewer like pushed up his glasses and said, well, it's interesting that the TIE fighter was able to go to hyperspace because generally TIE fighters can't go to hyperspace. Did anyone object to that? And then Tony Gilroy's exact words were, Pablo didn't say anything about that. None of the nerds objected. And his exact words were, none of the nerds objected, which was hilarious. And
I can imagine
this was a test. This was some sort of experimental TIE fighter, clearly, right?
Clearly. Yeah. And it was hilarious because I just love that he said none of the nerds objected. and I think he would say all the time that sometimes people, Pablo would give him things, would say like, and so the Gorman massacre was something that Pablo had said, hey, you know what, you could, because I guess Tony in the meeting said something like, oh, well, we need to have this planet where, giant riots break out and there's this insurgency. And then it was Pablo that said, oh, well, Gorman's open. And he's like, well, Gorman is like, and then tells him, oh yeah, it's a part of the cartoon. It was mentioned on Rebels. And so then they would, they'd pull up episodes and they'd watch scenes and then they'd go, okay, this is how we can use it. Right. And one of the writers said that he was saying, he was like, I watched the meeting scene in Rogue One 150 times. And would just be mining things like, oh, this character said this and this character said that. Wow. And, so they had to do all that. They did all that research, but yes, there were just things that Pablo and like that crew. And I tell people all the time, like my dream job in the universe is if somebody would give me the job to be the Pablo Hidalgo of the Philip K. Dick universe, right? Like
You
I
that.
have
think
to
you've given
seize it.
yourself that. You've given
Yeah.
yourself that job.
I've been working on it. But it's funny because I think Pablo's role, like all the showrunners, if you watch enough interviews with the Star Wars showrunners, if it's Skeleton Crew, Acolyte, whatever, they all thank Pablo Hidalgo, or they all talk about, oh, well, I passed this through Pablo. So they're not talking to George Lucas. They're talking to Pablo Hidalgo, right? Who very smartly Lucasfilm hired, right? Like when they just found like, oh, this guy's like a walking Wikipedia, right? And so they just put him on the payroll very
Well,
smartly.
obviously, yeah, paying dividends there. The other interesting thing. So, I mean, I thought what they did with Gorman was amazing. Just this whole world they created, the fact that they modeled it on was it the French resistance or just the resistance against the Nazis in
I
general?
assume it was French because of the accent or the language.
Yeah.
It was like French
Yeah.
sound doing.
I was gonna say, I was personally, as a Romance language specialist, I was trying to be like, what are they basing this on? Like, is this
Totally.
like modified Catalan or something? Like, I'm trying to
Yeah.
piece it together.
Well, I know that Gilroy said that in the writers' room they called him the space French often. so
Yeah.
so they didn't mess around with they knew what they were doing. They wanted it to be like a French feeling, which is an interesting inverse when you think about the Battle of Algiers being a big influence on those things, because the French were not the good guys like
Right.
in that situation.
Although the rest of the show being so heavily influenced by Army of Shadows, that is absolutely about the French resistance. So, yeah.
Absolutely, yes. And the French resistance, um and I had to do a lot of research on French. A huge chunk of my current novel is flashbacks to the French occupation of Paris. So one of the main characters is a Nazi double agent who was high up in the Paris occupation forces. So believe me, I recognized a lot of that, right? So and just having read about 6 or 7 books on the topic in the last couple months, it was clearly, Luthen is clearly influenced by a lot of the French resistors. I mean, he's just very clearly there. But yeah, so that first arc was really good. How it came back to, I don't know the name. I don't know the name. I remember Ferrix, that their planet, but I don't remember the grain planet.
Mm.
But what was eventually Cassian flies back because he has to save Bix, and Brasso, who is a great character who we lost in that episode. But when he heads back to that planet, and that whole thing of like the occupation forces, we had the first sexual assault in Star Wars, which was you know handled, I thought, very well, because that scene was a show of how these fascists use their power in little micro ways. And but we also saw like the harassing of the migrant workers. Did anybody have any comments on that episode? Like Evan, Dave, anything?
Yeah, I mean, the farm worker thing is interesting to me, that they were undocumented laborers essentially. Um, I- it I caught into that, although it's one of those things where in the context of contemporary our contemporary world, I can see a lot of bad actors seizing on that. The idea that undocumented migrant farm workers are insurgents or hide insurgents. On the other hand, there's absolutely an element of like, I mean, it's sort of the classic gorilla swimming among the fish swimming among the water of the people kind of idea, like that they could hop in and out of these different, again, sort of working class kind of places and just sort of blend in to be able to not get caught. Which is absolutely, especially like some of the early stages when you're organizing little cells, which is sort of what this show is building on. Absolutely like essential to the kind of survival. Yeah.
Right. And I think some people mistook one of the things that was happening in there, which was that a lot of people thought that the guy who ran the farm like turned them in to the ISB, and that's not what happened. And in fact, if you watch closer, Brasso actually lies to try and save the guy. And so it's very clear. I watched all these episodes twice because I knew with the storytelling being as dense as it was that I was missing things. And especially I watched like the final two arcs actually 3 times. I admit it. And what I really of the storytelling that was going on there is I think a lot of people were missing that the farm workers and the guy who ran the farm were actually trying to help each other. They were, trying to get around the Empire. Nobody had love for the Empire there, right? And an MVP of season 1 that we did not mention, which I of course want to mention, is Cassian's adopted mother. Marva was a phenomenal character, like a really amazing character. And I will say that in this last rewatch of Rogue One, like I kind of felt her ghost in there a little bit. And that's one of the things that a prequel can do if done right? You can feel these things. But okay, so the second arc, I think, is the one that of the season is the one that this was written by the old showrunner of House of Cards. And so this is the one with the wedding and the manipulation in the Senate and all the things that were going on with that. And I do think that that's one that can be kind of overlooked for its importance of how things go on. But the title of episode 4, the one where they start the wedding, is "Have you ever been to Gorman?" And the question is really important because one of the things that happens in the episode is Luthen meets Mon Mothma's assistant, and he says, "Have you ever been to Gorman?" And then he said, "My mother was from Gorman." And then he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And that was the root of, that's when he started. That's when he brought him into the resistance, right? Like, he's like, "Oh, this guy has family on Gorman. I'm going to recruit him." And that's why it's the name of the episode, which a lot of people did not catch as well.
I completely missed that. I didn't notice that.
And this is the one where they're starting to, you see a lot of the spycraft things where they have to remove the bug, like during the wedding party. You're seeing like, that's the one where Clea has to pretend to flirt with Lonnie, who's their infiltrator. And this whole arc, along with the wedding, has so much spycraft and so much stuff about the rules of the Senate and the things that are going on. I could see where a lot of people would not like these episodes, but these are very important episodes and they're a very important foundation. I'm assuming, Alma, there was a lot that you got out of these ones, but
it's funny. I mean, of course, I enjoyed the episodes and I loved the visual aspects of it, but I'm not the kind of person that likes fancy weddings or anything like that, right? So there was like a little bit too much of that for me. But
sure.
all the other things, I mean, I know some people love that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Disney focuses on princesses for a reason. But all the other aspects I thought were very interesting. I'd have to say the bug placement and her trying to remove it, I I felt like it was maybe a little bit like one step too far, her hand bleeding to get it out or whatever. But it did, and I thought about it later, that was part of, like a lot of people really admire Clea, right?
Yeah.
She is the jack of all trades when it comes to, her place in the resistance. When I first saw her, and she was always hunched over the console, right, with the cans on, listening for intercepts and stuff.
Her first acting job, by the way. Her first
Was
acting
it?
Oh,
gig
wow.
was Andor
Oh,
season 1.
well, she's amazing.
Yeah.
But, I saw her as a particular kind of, she had a particular role. So I was a SIGINT analyst for a lot of my career. And that's exactly what we do, right? We have the cans on and we're listening for things. And so I know that job very well. But then in season 2, we see her more as a field operative, where she's doing more than just, collecting signals, getting information and ferrying it up the line to other folks. So also in season 1, they kind of show her work as what we call COVCOM, covert communications, which is communications between a handler and their asset, like Lonnie, who you referred to as an infiltrator. It's the secret communications, right, between those two, so they can take place underneath the nose of the empire, so to speak. But the fact that they had a listening device in what's his name, Skeldon, the gangster's private collection of antiquities, right?
Right.
Shows that it wasn't just COVCOM, that they have all of these bugs planted everywhere. And so in addition to doing the special communications with agents in the field, she is, she's a SIGINT analyst. She's listening. Now, no, so this is probably way down in the weeds and nobody else finds it exciting, but I thought that was really interesting how they were showing both sides of the coin there. The only thing I thought was kind of weird was for a society with advanced technology, that she had to do everything live, because we really don't do a lot of that stuff live. It's recorded and you're listening to it later. That poor chick had to be on the machine, in order to pick up the communications. They had no
Star
recording
Wars
device.
has really strange like technological holes. You don't ask me.
Okay.
Yeah. Future retro tech. Right.
Does Gilroy not know about tape recorders? But anyway, but overall, I thought it was it was a lot of fun for someone like me. You can just recognize certain things, recognize work.
Alma,
And
what, if you don't mind me asking, what era were you involved in this stuff? I'm asking because I was a big Cold War novel reader, and
oh, okay.
I'm wondering.
Well, yes, I started in the Cold War. So I started in 82.
Oh wow, okay.
I retired in 2017, but I continued as a consultant. And the last third of my career, I was a technologist. So I actually did a lot with like the future of spycraft and how technology is going to make all the stuff that you learned during the Cold War obsolete. And so again, that was sort of this interesting mix. I could see that they were really drawing on, what everybody, so I also have TV shows in development and I talk to producers all the time and they're fascinated about spy stories and how authentic they are and that sort of thing. And what they passed on to me is that everyone who writes spy stories, their knowledge comes from the same place, the same TV shows and movies, right? So it was interesting to see Gilroy's interpretation of these kind of standard, tropes of being a spy. But just between you and me, that's all going to change. It's changing now. So it's going to be a whole new spycraft, and it'll be a while before, hopefully, the public sort of
Yeah. And Gilroy wanted it to feel like a 70s spycraft movie. Like,
oh, it did. It did.
Yeah.
I never say nice things about Ronald Reagan, but the one good thing he did was recommend The Hunt for Red October, and that sort of started me on the path of reading all those books. And
well, and another thing that happens during this arc of episodes is Cassian visits Gorman and meets the rebels, and he sees that it's a trap, that they're not ready, that they're not prepared for what's coming. And that's when, and this is very important to Tony Gilroy, but Luthen doesn't care because he's an accelerationist. Luthen wants things to get so bad that people will want to fight. And this is one of the things that puts Luthen and Mon Mothma and Bail Organa like at odds, is that they want to be careful, and Luthen's like, oh no, things need to get bad, and they need to get bad fast, otherwise no one will do anything. And that's his perspective. And it's funny because this is where you see Cassian and Luthen argue, because Cassian knows like they're not ready, they're going to get massacred. And so this is where you start to see the cracks between them. And that's where you see Cassian end up at Yavin and not with Luthen, right?
Well, I understand why all that's important to the story, but you could argue that, I mean, that Luthen wasn't really accelerating it. This was going to happen, and it was happening pretty quickly on the Empire's timetable. It was going to be ugly. I mean, it was just an opportunity for Luthen. He could exploit it, and that would make what the Empire was doing more obvious, right?
Yeah, but that was Luthen's goal with Aldhani, to steal like the Empire's money. It was less about the money, it was more about pissing off the Empire, and because they knew the Empire would overreact and start,
Okay, so you're establishing this pattern for Luthen.
I'm establishing a pattern for Luthen.
But the problem there was that Luthen provided the Empire with their justification for the massacre. Right. So he was playing into their hands, whereas Cassian kind of seemed to see through that a little bit.
And that's one of the things that... But
that's one of the things there anyway, though, because they were setting up the propaganda. They were demonizing the Gormans. They were so they could justify their crackdown, and they were gonna loot the planet. I might add, for rare minerals, like rare earth minerals. That Tony Gilroy is really quite the smart little devil. What are you gonna destroy a country? Oh, I'm sorry, not a country, a planet over Greenland or Panama. You want their rare earth minerals.
Yeah. And on top of that too, and again, this goes back to like there was no reason given for why the Gormans were massacred in Rebels.
Yeah.
It was just
smart man.
Yeah. Well, so he just he went back and gave them a reason. So and then there's go ahead.
I was going to say, the one other thing I'd say about that split, which I actually like, well, both because, like I said, it starts to give you more of a sense of like that they're the Rebel Alliance being a diverse group of people approaching this for a lot of different reasons. But also, I liked that it was an impossible dilemma. Like, you're all arguing back and forth. Was he walking into a trap? Should they have been more careful? And to me, I think just thinking of it as a storytelling thing, because there is no objective reality to this, right? I mean, this is a story that they made up about a space war. Like, so approaching it as a question and as of storytelling, though, it gets at exactly a thing that exactly these kind of social movements will face, right? Yeah. And sometimes you may be in a situation where both are true, right? That you are walking into a trap, but also these people are doomed. So are you just going to sit back and take it, right? And honestly, that seems to be one of the main thrusts. If you want to, rewatching Rogue One, that struck me as like one of the central dilemmas of that one as well, right? Was the whole question of, do we act or not? And and basically the Empire forces their hand into the open warfare that is the original Star Wars trilogy. So yeah.
Yeah, and by the way, a neat thing that I noticed on my third watch of the last arc is, so each episode when they do the Andor logo, it just plays music. On the episode after the Gorman massacre, instead of just playing music, it's a very faint version of the We Are Gorman song. And I did not notice that till the third time I watched it. And then I was like, and I got chills because I was like, it was almost, I didn't recognize it at first, but I was like, oh my God, that's what that is. And so that was a really neat little thing. The last thing on that second arc, I would say, is there's also the interesting thing of Mon Mothma trying to give an out to her daughter, and her daughter not taking it. And I know everybody made a big deal about Mon Mothma dancing.
I actually want to say, because we mentioned that, I want to say about those scenes, while on one level, I will say it's why my wife doesn't like the show. She finds that kind of stuff super boring. But and honestly, I also thought there was maybe a little more of that than necessary. But the two things I liked about it, again, we're getting a sense of like, you hear about that there was a Senate, and what the heck does this Senate do? So you're getting some of that, but also like, again, it's Star Wars going, oh wait, it's a whole galaxy, and there's a lot of different, even among the humans, there are different cultures and things, and you start to get a sense of like Mon Mothma coming from this Chandrilan world, that within the Chandrilans themselves, like clearly, I felt like Mon and Vel were kind of you could think of as like opposing traditionalism, you might say. I mean, they were
Yeah.
revolutionaries and progressives, and her husband and her daughter were conservatives in certain sense. Like,
Yeah.
again, small c. I don't want to. I'm not going to judge Sandra and this made-up culture or anything about that. But like,
That's what we're
I
here
think
for.
part of Mon's disappointment, and I felt like I got a sense of Mon being disappointed that her daughter was going into this kind of conservative traditionalist kind of perspective, and I
Yeah.
thought that was just as texture to the stories really cool. And
Yeah,
it's
because
again, it's one of those things I wish Star Wars had the courage to do more often.
yeah, we're all
Um,
dealing with that with people in our family or
yeah.
circles that or coworkers that you're like, how the hell are you voting for that guy, right? Or like, how can you do that? Or
Your
whatever.
own daughter, though.
Or like I said, even just again, not maybe I don't want to. I'll try to make this the last time I make the comparison, but like Star Trek will do that, and in
Yeah,
fact make that part of the story. That there
yeah,
are different cultures, and those cultures have different ways of thinking about things and approaching them. And it just makes for a richer world that's more interesting to be in than just these kind of strict storytelling kind of things that are all about sort of adventure war stories. I mean, that's
yeah,
fun, but
yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, I
yeah,
thought it
and
was a great element because she was in an arranged marriage and you saw
Hmm.
how, you know, sterile that was. And so, yeah, we see her humanity that she's trying to save her daughter at the last minute, and her daughter does not understand what she's walking into. And, she can't stop her.
yeah. So, and then next we get into what I consider to be the best arc of the series, which is 7, 8, and 9, which is
Wait, hold
Messenger.
on, one more, David. Sorry, one more thing about
Okay.
the about Cassian on Gore being the slick fabric salesman or artist or designer. That was hilarious. Being, but
Yeah.
also the bellhop slash hotel worker guy was my favorite scene stealing small character. Like his little arc was great. I thought it was like the best like 2 minutes of screen time I've seen in a long time. I really like in terms of like showing him as being all down for the revolution. I thought that was super cool.
Well, and you didn't get to rewatch Rogue One, but he gets the line of Rogue One. He's the person who said, the rebellions are built on hope, and that becomes
Oh,
the
I didn't know.
line.
I didn't recognize him. That's hilarious.
Yeah, so that's what Jen Urso says to the whole. Well, first Cassian says it to her, and then she says at the meeting when they're trying to decide whether they're going to try to steal the plans or go to Scarif. She says to the whole gathering of Yavin, rebellions are built on hope, and it means more now because we know that it was just the bellhop who said it to Cassian,
Right.
and so yeah, that's one way where Andor added an amazing texture to Rogue One, and that's credit to Tony Gilroy, yeah, and who, by the way, Tony Gilroy gets a little as much credit as he gets for all of Andor. He gets too much credit for Rogue One because his contribution to Rogue One has been overstated many, many, many times. He did a last minute rewrite and he rewrote some of the scenes that they did in the reshoots, but Gareth Edwards still directed the reshoots. And there are people who think that Gareth Edwards got fired off the movie and Tony Gilroy took over and finished it. And that's not true. There is video footage of Gareth Edwards directing the Darth Vader scene that was all reshoots. And so I just want to put that out there. Like Gilroy worked with Gareth Edwards on the rewrites. They worked together on them. So that is one part of the Star Wars history that has been,
Plenty of credit to go around.
yeah, plenty of credit to go
Yeah.
around. So then the best arc to me is the Gorman Massacre arc, and those 3 episodes, to me, that was you know, to me, episode 8 and 9 are the high watermark for the entire series. I think they're the best episodes. That's 8 is the massacre, and 9 is when Mon Mothma gives her speech and is evacuated. And but here we see Dedra Nero get, like, we see her be the lady boss of the the Empire on the and the whole thing. And we didn't talk a lot about her relationship with Cyril, but it is very funny. I know Tony Gilroy said his favorite character to write in all of Andor was Cyril's mother, Edie. He has said multiple times that he would do that. He said the easiest, I think in an interview, he said the easiest way to get him back to Star Wars is tell him he's going to write a show for her, which was hilarious. And we got through her, we got to see Imperial TV, which was funny. And she's definitely the Jewish mother. I recognize her very well from my family. But the Cyril relationship, that whole thing plays out where you kind of get your Les Mis scene where Cyril, like, and he's an interesting character because he was all in on the Empire, and then at the last minute he sees that he was lied to, but people will overstate. I've seen some people think that he had a change of heart. I don't think that's a fair assessment. I think because he still goes to the Gorman resistance and he says, I can help you if we pin it all on the outside agitators. And that's when the lady slaps him. He hasn't had a change of heart about the Empire. He's just had a change of heart about, he sees what's happening to Gorman. Right. And that's an interesting gray area that is a little bit too nuanced for most Star Wars fans.
I saw him as like a naive true believer who was beginning to be disillusioned, essentially. Yes. Like the whole time, the first season, I hated his guts, fashy little turd. Everything about him I could not stand, although I thought it was interesting to have. And most of the second season too, but I mean, it's interesting that, like, who knows where it would have gone, though? I mean, you think of the fact that so many of the far right in the US, there's a lot of folks who are people who went to the far right, but after being screwed by their government, right? How many, like, vets who are like, I didn't, whatever, like I got hung out to dry or whatever. So, whatever kind of resentment, often pretty well founded. I mean, just think of, like, was it Tim McVeigh said that it was actually the dead that he saw in, like, Iraq that really made him go, like, oh God, are we the bad guys? But then he ended up becoming a white supremacist, right? I can't claim to understand that full trip, but, like, I feel like he might have been one of those people. Like, he truly believed the Empire was bringing law and order and stability, and then it was starting to crack when he actually had to see what was happening up close.
Well, and it's just the nuance of that character was great. Like, he was a fashy turd, and and then he just sees red when he sees Andor, right? Like the guy that he had been hunting and that he blamed for, like, causing his whole life to go down. And then of course we got the Les Mis moment, where in the who are you, when that Andor will never know who Cyril is, right? And we'll never know the role that he played in his life. But he had as much, Cassian has much, because Cyril is behind Ferrex, right? So if he had known, he would have been pretty angry as well. So that was that interesting, and I love that they gave him a they live fight where it was like, kind of a realistic. Like,
well, it was kind of ridiculous. It was like, why doesn't Andor know how to fight a little better? Or why doesn't Cassian know how to fight a little bit? Like, that was,
like, you get tackled in the middle of a sniper operation. You're not exactly on your toes.
It was like amateur hour.
Yeah. And then, and by the way, one thing that happens in this arc, and for those of you who haven't seen the interviews, I mean, Gilroy, this has been said a million times, but bringing KS-20, the robot, in during that the original version, the whole reason why Tony Gilroy got brought on is they actually made a pilot for a different Andor show. They went all the way into filming it. And it was basically The Mandalorian with Andor, and K2SO. It was just them going around the universe having adventures. And they showed it to Tony Gilroy. And this is how it all started, is they showed it to Tony Gilroy and they said, "What do you think?" And he was like, "This is terrible." This is just going to be every week you're going to be trying to figure out ways you're going to have to keep K2SO on the ship because he can't blend in. And, it's just going to, it's going to, and then he told Kathy Kennedy, he sat there and said, like, "You got a chance to tell all these stories about revolution and insurgencies and all this stuff." And that's when she said, "Okay, we'll go do it." And that's when he wrote the treatment with the brothel, because he thought there's no way she'll say yes. And then she said yes. And then now here we are talking about it. But if they hadn't written that whole thing for K2SO, I mean, they filmed it. There's literally somewhere on a hard drive, there's a version of the pilot of The Mandalorian with K2SO and Cassian. And thankfully it didn't happen. And think about how bad that would have been. Right. And then, but the other path they went down was the original version of this arc, episode 10, where they introduced K2SO, they basically said it was an Alien remake within Andor, where they got trapped on a freighter with K2SO. And the whole episode was like a horror movie of like all the rebels getting just massacred like on this freighter. And then the entire episode was about capturing K2SO. And they wrote it, they pre-vised it, they did everything, and they said it was like a horror movie in the middle of Andor. And then Tony Gilroy just looked at it and said, ain't gonna work. And then he just said, and then he just looked at the episodes and he said, "This doesn't fit." Mm-hmm. But one of the reasons why I think episode 10 and 11 seemed like they could have been one episode and they were stretched into two is because they took out the K2SO episode, right? So the whole thing there was because they I mean, it's clear what they did. They stretched the whole like Luthen dying and Clea escaping into two episodes. That was originally going to be one. And they were going to have a K2SO episode in there. So that's just the behind the scenes on that, and how that happened. But so the Gorman Massacre is with the singing of the songs, and that's where they were remaking Battle of Potemkin and Battle of Algiers, or
Battleship Potemkin.
Battleship Potemkin. And
yeah, that's really big. I hadn't put that together till you just said it, but that massacre is straight up Battleship Potemkin.
Yeah. And Battle of Algiers, and much like the Ferrex, assault, where they, were really patient in the storytelling and made it very realistic. The Gorman Massacre was really well done on screen. Any comments on that? F and Dave, what did you think of that whole episode?
I mean, yeah, I thought it was great. I loved I loved pretty much everything about it. The way that they I don't know, it was just very sad, very tragic, but also and we actually felt that, but also the chaos of both how the Empire sort of provoked the massacre themselves, like the bit about purposely sending out the untrained troops to try to make them do some unnecessary nonsense in the crowd just so that they could start a fight. I thought it was something I found very, I don't know, it's a thing you hear about. It's the kind of stuff that happens. And then also pretty good job of just how chaotic and hectic that kind of situation would be. I mean, that's, I guess, for me, I'll disagree with Issa. I liked the sloppiness of that fist fight, even with the idea that both Cassie. First of all, I think it's fine. Not every, I like the John Wick movies, but it's cool to see a well choreographed fist fight that also doesn't feel like a dance. That really does feel like two dudes who are tired and, you know getting worn out and maybe aren't like perfectly coordinated all the time, especially like, I don't know, man, if I was in the middle of aiming and then get sucker punched or actually tackled, probably get the wind knocked out of you. Yeah, I might not be fighting so clean after that.
Plus,
So I
they're
just
in the
thought in
middle
general
of
had
a
that real
maelstrom, right? There's like this.
Yeah, exactly. Like
massacre taking place.
explosions, there's gunfire, there's like, yeah, of course it's gonna be sloppy and ugly,
And an
I don't know.
underrated moment.
I feel like Cassian would have had a self-defense course at some point. You know what I mean? Like,
Well, sure,
some kind
but
of personal
yeah,
combat.
but he was in the middle of it. He was concentrating on sniping somebody, and he got
fighting
tackled.
this like nerdy dude. Come on.
Yeah, but and one
trained as a cop
underrated
and working
great
as an
moment.
infiltrator for the intelligence. Like
Yeah,
it's not like Cyril was a complete numbnuts. Like he also, I mean, he kind of was. He was being
I mean,
played as a patsy, but
he
like,
was the supply department guy, you know.
so, yeah.
It's like suddenly it's like is this guy the cook, you know? Like whatever, Under Siege or whatever, you know. I don't know how I got an Under Siege reference.
I don't know how you got an Under Siege reference in, but you did. So there's one underrated scene too, which is when Cyril is put in the safe room with all like the killer droids. And that's when he knows that the massacre is coming because the droids are just sitting there waiting. And that was a great moment because he just knew like, oh shit, they're gonna slaughter these people.
I thought it was interesting that the Empire was still bothering to pretend, you know, like it felt like they
still have a Senate at this point.
Sure, but who cares? Like they're just, you know, the senator before Mon Mothma just stood up and made some crap up. Why bother with all the subterfuge? You know, like they're just going to do it anyway. Especially when the previous massacre was just someone landing a ship on a crowd of people. You know, like there's no subtlety there. So they've actually gotten more subtle by, you know, now we need to create this complicated situation that no one will ever hear about before we start shooting.
Or maybe because somebody landed you know, the last massacre, they knew they had to orchestrate the sort of fig leaf, right?
Sure.
To sort of give them plausible.
And by the way, the first Tarkin massacre, that the reason why that was involved in that is that it was literally just mentioned that in a Tarkin novel that because whoever wrote the Tarkin novel saw the mention of the Gorman massacre and that there wasn't any details. So they wrote into this Tarkin novel that Tarkin killed all these people in Gorman. And then, you know, Pablo took it to Tony Gilroy and said, well, yeah, but that was years, you know, the one mention of it. And he was like, and then Tony Gilroy was like, well, that wasn't the Gorman massacre. That was a Gorman massacre. Right. So, and then he built it into the story with the monument and the square and because he's a smart guy, he found a good way to massage the canon there. And I will say Star Trek could get a little better at massaging canon that way. But you know, there's that. And then as far as and then, well, one of the really smart things once we get into, so does anybody have anything else on the Gorman massacre? Otherwise I'll move on to Mon Mothma in the speech. Anything else on Gorman? Okay, so some really great stuff in the Mon Mothma thing, and I want to connect it to Rebels, the cartoon, and one of the smart.
Really... Oh wait, I'm so sorry. I had something.
Okay, go ahead.
All episode to say it. So the fake French language bothered me so much. Like not like it was bad or whatever, but just like it drove me crazy because I speak French very poorly, and I kept feeling like they were actually speaking French, and I just didn't understand the words, and that was really annoying. But also, it reminded me of this old British show, LO. I don't know. It was kind of obscure, so no one knows it, but it was occupied France, World War II, and there were English and German and French, and they all spoke English, but the French people spoke with the French accent and the German people spoke with the German accent, and they couldn't understand each other, which was a hilarious setup for the show if you ever get a chance to go watch it. But anyway, but so it was just very distracting to me that they weren't just speaking English. I would have preferred if they just spoke English, which is a funny thing.
I mean, it took me a few seconds of like hearing the space French and being like, oh, that's totally French. And then I kind of let it go. Just like, you know, Cassian looking younger and Rogue One.
I didn't lose sleep. I didn't lose sleep over it or anything, but it was distracting.
Okay. So on to the Mon Mothma speech episode. Welcome to the Rebellion. That's the name of the episode. And so how it connects to Rebels is very interesting. So, and this is a really smart thing that Tony Gilroy did again, which was that in Rebels, so Rebels is the cartoon about a crew of rebel characters who have started to show up in the Star Wars series Ahsoka in live action. And so in the episode, they have a ship called the Ghost that the rebels are on, and in the series Rebels, it is the Ghost that delivers Mon Mothma to Yavin, and it's a part of the story. So when I saw Cassian part of the escape, I was like, well, how are they going to explain this? Because she gets to Yavin on the Ghost. And then they very smartly had it be like, well, we need her to give this speech to the whole galaxy. And she's going to do it from this one rebel ship, but she can't be giving that speech from one of Luthen's operatives. It has to be one of our people, one of our Yavin crew, right? And we're not sending her to Yavin with one of Luthen's people. We need to raise the flag for the rebellion and wave the flag. So, and then there's this whole great scene where they explain to Cassian, like, hey, it's just better if they do it. You want to go watch her speech? And then he has the great line. He's like, I've heard her speak before. Right. And he just doesn't care about the credit. Right. But, and then it turned it into a really good plot point by taking what happened in the cartoon and actually making it a plot point. And you can, if you don't want to invest the time to watch the whole cartoon, Mon Mothma's speech from the Ghost is on YouTube. You can watch that just to see the difference. And Dan Gilroy, Tony Gilroy's brother, who wrote this arc, did talk about how he agonized over Mon Mothma's speech because he thought very seriously about the fact that she is sacrificing everything by going out there and speaking. And she probably doesn't expect to live through this, right? She doesn't expect to escape, but she's going to speak her mind. And she knows that, you know, her husband's going to be gone and her life and her kid probably isn't going to, you know, accept this, and that this is everything changing, right? And so Dan Gilroy said that he spent a lot of time on that speech. But he also, in the interview I listened to with him, said that, you know, he wanted to watch for ways where it was setting up the speech that she gave in Rebels, the cartoon, you know, that he wanted it to be a little different, but, you know, she's setting up in the speech she gives before the Senate. She's saying, you have to speak up. And the one she gives from the Ghost, she's saying, hey, we're actually fighting. And now you got to join the fight. Right. So that's the difference between the two speeches, which I think is interesting. But, and I love the idea that Cassian frees her, gets her out of there, saves the day, and gets no credit for it. Right. Because it's not about that. That's one thing I loved about that. And it's interesting, you know, because, you know, she doesn't trust Luthen, but she trusts Bail, but Bail's the one that's been compromised. His team's been compromised, and Luthen is the one that ends up saving her, which plays an important role later when no one trusts Luthen, and it gives Mon Mothma that one reason to trust Luthen, because he was the one that saved her that day, and there would be no Mon Mothma at Yavin without Luthen, right? So brilliant writing set up.
Yeah,
okay,
that was one of my favorite lines this season. Just like, when's the last time you saw him? A year ago, when he sent me to save Mon Mothma at the Senate.
Right. Because most people didn't know that he had saved her. Yeah. And the look on Mon Mothma's face of like, yeah, he kind of did. You know, it was all well done. Yes. Yeah. And that's shooting ahead, but yes. And then so any thoughts on this Mon Mothma speech? And this whole escape, and
I felt like she was talking to us, the American people, but
yeah,
yes, it was hard not to be moved by it.
Yeah, and it's cool because the actor, excuse me, who plays Mon Mothma, was originally in Revenge of the Sith playing Mon Mothma and was cut from the movie. And you know, so the fact that she's still playing Mon Mothma is awesome. You know, yeah, because she got cut from the movie originally. So, which is a funny part of the story. Anything else on the speech? Okay, we can move on to now. This is where Alma and I got to get into Luthen. And Luthen is definitely my favorite character from Andor. I like that he's an accelerationist. I like that he is dangerous, that he is morally gray. So what we have in this episode, and I got something, my post about Lonnie on Facebook, I got one thing wrong. He is not the only reason we know that the Death Star was happening, because in Rogue One, Galen Erso sends Bodhi, the pilot, out to try and get the information out. But the first person who gets the word out about the Death Star is Lonnie. And Lonnie is a very heroic figure to me in the Star Wars world, because he was underground in, an asset inside the Empire throughout the whole thing, and risking his family and his life constantly. And what makes him an interesting asset as well is that not only was he risking himself, but if you go back and watch it another time, Lonnie is constantly undermining certain little things. And we hear about the resistance during the first Trump administration, that there were people that were trying, like, within the government to, like, stop him from doing certain things. And Lonnie plays that role many, many times. And one of the most hilarious and genius things in Andor is that we find out about the Death Star because of a bureaucratic error, which one of the writers said, the writer who wrote this said, I kind of thought because Tony Gilroy added that later. And then the writer who wrote the episode argued with Tony Gilroy that he thought that was silly. And then Signalgate happened, right? Right? And proved Tony Gilroy right, that a bureaucratic error where Dedra accidentally gets the Death Star plan sent to her. Accidentally. And then, of course, she eventually says, I should have returned it. I should have deleted it. I should have done that. But she acts on it. And that whole thing about her being a scavenger comes up, And so it's a bureaucratic error that leads Lonnie to find out about the Death Star. But then he takes this information. He says, I've been burnt, because going to Luthen and telling him about the Death Star means that Dedra is going to know eventually. She's going to know that Lonnie was the one who found out about it because he was reading her files, and she's going to know. So he's burnt.
I didn't think that. I thought it was like he was so amazed by what he saw that he spent like too long in there, and they were going to catch him and know that he was onto something. Like, I didn't, because she didn't know that he was in her files for years, and I don't think she would have, but he accessed the sensitive information for like hours to read it. And I thought that was the problem.
Either way, I think it works, but I think the main thing is that he was burned. And he went to Luthen and he said, here's the information. You got to act on this, but you got to help me. Well, and this is what Alma and I were debating on Messenger was, and Alma, you can tell me what you thought your problem with what Luthen did was.
Well, I mean, first of all, what you said about Luthen being a morally gray character, everybody in intelligence is morally gray, right? When you work in this, because you see that your side is not always right, but you're hoping that you have the greater good, right? You're hoping that you're working on the side of the angels, but you're conflicted almost all the time. There's very few people that are 100% good, right? Lonnie is one of those people. So Lonnie is Luthen's asset. Lonnie is that person inside the enemy camp who, for whatever reason, and I'll get to that in a minute, has decided that he is going to be a traitor, right, to his side. He is going to share those secrets with the other person. And in this field, they say generally it's for one of four reasons, and it's the acronym MICE: money, ideology, coercion, which is like you can blackmail the person, you have something on them, or ego. And in the real world, it's almost always money. But it's not money for Lonnie. It's ideology. And he's very pure about this. He's, probably the only 100% pure person in the whole show. So, and as you said, we see him act nobly time and time again. And he's very cautious about it. He's
Yes,
very
but at
good
the
in his
same
trade.
time, he's going to have to carry out imperial orders. And I think about this all the time with the current book I'm writing, because I have a Nazi traitor that's a major character in my book. But she has to give orders to kill communists, and she has to do
Right.
that.
Or she's going to blow her
Or blow
position.
her.
I mean, if she's going to continue to be of any use, she's got to stay. But at some point, your character, just like Lonnie, has to make the decision
Right.
is, I'll do these things. It's the lesser evil, right? I'm trying to do the greater good. But this is where I disagree with you on what Gilroy did with Lonnie. I could not see any reason why Luthen had to kill him. Hear me out. Because in that earlier scene where Clea and Luthen are talking, and she says that she needs, to be the one to come back and destroy the comms gear and, whatever. And he says, no, no, I want you to go. I mean, it sounds like he's telling her to go because that's the safer thing, right?
Right.
And in the moment, I am assuming it's because they have an exit plan and she will be, he's supposed to come too, but she will be best positioned for the exit plan. So they have an exit plan. Now, Lonnie was an asset, and clearly in their discussion, he said Luthen made the promise to him that he would exfiltrate him, he would get him out of there and his family when the time was right. And the time was clearly right. Because yes, he had been accessing somebody else's files that he was not supposed to have access to. Believe it or not, they don't usually go through security logs every day. I understand this is way down there in the weeds, but eventually, when this whole thing is looking suspicious and Deirdre looks suspicious, that's when you go back and you start going through the logs and you're going to see that, oh, somebody had gotten into her files who wasn't supposed to be there. So yes, he had some time, but he was probably going to be discovered. It just seemed to me that there was a possibility that they would have taken him out. And the good guys make good on their promises, right? I know you're not going to believe me, but in CIA, for instance, they take a lot of pride in doing everything they possibly can if they have a compromised asset to get them out, right? And it's the bad guys who just kind of cavalierly say, oh, not convenient for me, shoot him in the chest. So, but I mean, I can understand in the beginning of Andor, Luthen was much
I'm
more.
so sorry, but I hate to interrupt, but like, for example, like a translator who helped American troops during, the Afghanistan war or something, we would definitely help them. And
and we're seeing that's not happening. But
okay, policy and what the people who actually work the jobs want to do.
That's true. That's different.
Two separate things, right?
Of course.
Believe me, there were a lot of, and this is that, you have to take orders. Many times in my job, and I worked in policy after 9/11. I was seconded to policy for 2 years, and I worked for Rumsfeld in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Many, many times you may disagree with what they decide the policy is going to be, but that is not your job to whatever, right? The American people vote people into an office. You are there to uphold the will of the American people. If it's so bad, maybe you become a whistleblower, but that's another discussion for another day. I'm not saying we always do the right thing, but I am saying it's CIA. Believe me, they will do everything in their power to try to save a person. It's the bad guys who will maybe make a cavalier decision about.
Yeah, but you're talking about people that are in a position of power, whereas Luthen's not in a position of power.
No, but it sounded
he's a rebel.
To me from what right, but he still had an exit strategy. It sounded like they had an exit strategy.
Yeah, but he didn't have what he didn't have an exit strategy for was for Luthen's or for Lonnie's family.
But they were already out. They were already out. Lonnie
but he would have had to have reunited them. And what I think is, and here's my point on Luthen, is that in that moment, Luthen made the decision that he could not save Lonnie and he could not save himself. Kayla's already gone. She's at 2, the exit strategy. He's not going to make it, and he cannot deal with that complication of Lonnie. And what I like is that you have a character that's ostensive or supposed to be on the side of good in our story, make a call that, and that's one of the reasons why I liked Rogue One when it came out. When I first saw Cassian shoot his own person, the person that was informing him, I said, this is different. This is different Star Wars, right? That they're willing to do something that looks evil and it looks bad, but they're going to do it for the rebellion. And what you're talking about, and I think one of the differences here is that Luthen is not in a position of power. He's not in a governmental role. He's not in, he's on the run rebel, and he has no.
I would argue a little bit because they set him up as like he's the spy master, right? He's the guy at the top of this pyramid. He runs his puppets. He's the mastermind. Otherwise, they wouldn't have the problem with them they had with them at the end. Look, I'm just saying that Gilroy could have explained why that decision had to be made. I agree that it is interesting that they will take a violent turn, rather quickly based on a situation in Andor, and that makes it feel a little bit more, I don't know, vital, whatever.
And dangerous.
From a tradecraft point of view, I have to say Cassian is a little quick on the trigger. But in most cases, you can argue that the person he's eradicating, like Tivik, I guess, in the beginning of Rogue One, he's not a good guy anyway, right? He's an informer, but he's kind of a scumbag, you can tell. He probably lies for money just as much as he gives you any good information. So you don't feel so bad. But Lonnie was complete gold, right? He never betrayed. He was not a bad guy in any way. He upheld his end of the bargain. I guess I would have liked to have seen Gilmore just work a little harder to explain why Luthen had to shoot him in that moment.
I agree. No, I didn't think that was necessary at all. I think he could have said something like, I'm burned. I can't help you. I'm sorry. You're on your own. Get out of here.
Right. And watch him go.
Well, right. And I think I see where you're coming from, and I think it's one of the interesting things. The fact that we can have this kind of discussion about the ins and outs of like one moment of a Star Wars show that's not about, well, that's not the meaning of the Force, right? The fact that we could have
I'll add one other thing that is sort of exonerates Luthen a little bit, and that is at the beginning, season 1, we see him, he's very much a spy master, right? Puppet master in control. As things start accelerating in season 2, we see him starting to lose it. So, he's stressed. He can't control everything. It's outside of his power now. So you can see him maybe making a bad decision.
I think.
Oh, did we just lose Alma?
I think we may have.
Okay.
Well, I'm excited to talk about Luthen dying and getting caught by Dedra, because that I did not like.
Well, I will say that we also saw with Luthen, we also saw that his origin from like the Clone Wars, that he started with PTSD to begin with, right? That he was a Republic soldier who
he's back.
Okay. We lost you for a little bit.
Yeah, we got you.
Okay. Am I back?
Okay. You are back.
Okay.
Can you hear us? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So we were talking about the PTSD that Luthen also had from being a part of the Clone Wars from the flashbacks too. That made him, And by the way, their first terrorist attack, I don't know how, that their first terrorist attack was on Naboo, on Palpatine's homeworld, was an interesting little detail. So, and then we have the whole, we do get some, so then, when he is burnt, and Issa, you wanted to talk about Dedra, that scene was fantastic. fantastic.
Oh, I couldn't stand it. I was really upset by that. Like, it was
Oh
well done
man.
in the sense that she came in and they had their little back and forth.
I
And
love
like,
scenes that are driven by that tensions driven by dialogue is my favorite.
yeah, no, okay. I mean, that
Ever.
was a really good scene, but the idea that he stuck around to get caught was just so dumb.
No, he
Like,
didn't. He was
oh,
destroying the evidence. He was in the
yeah.
process.
I mean, look,
Yeah.
dude, how hard is it to just remote control, blow up the evidence? Like, like whatever. Like there should have been a plan for that, right? Like you
I don't
should
There
know.
should have been.
and manually
I
pour acid or whatever on the transmitter or the codes or whatever. Like
I
he knew that was coming.
All
He
right,
could
go
have.
F and Dave.
Okay.
I mean, I think he was following the plan. First of all, I take the text for what it is and don't read much more into it. I assume, like we talked about the weirdness of the communication device. By the way, Dave, did you catch on? I felt like it almost felt like an Ansible.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it was supposed to be calling to the whole East Germany listening devices and
Oh,
like
okay, yeah. And that's something that looked, but it also looked like if you had a switchboard connected to multiple Ansibles, the way they talked about, like, oh yeah, he left us with this strange communication device that can connect to him.
yeah,
Those of you who aren't here, Ansible is out of Ursula Quinn's Hainish novels, and so
yeah,
it's a form of simultaneous communication that can occur across any amount of space
yeah.
through using two
It's
connected devices.
it's a key
So
part of the
yeah,
Dispossessed, which is
yeah,
an
the
incredible novel.
dispossessed, and it's also like actually shows up in the climax of well, it's also central to Left Hand of Darkness. It shows up in the climax of The World for World is Forest. But anyway, um,
And
yeah.
the Orson Scott Card books, the Ender books.
Oh, great.
A little
Two
different.
two opposite ends of the science fiction spectrum. But anyway, but no, but there's that. I guess I just take the text as, it's a literary text in a sense, or not literary, but like as a fictional text. And so I assumed this was the plan, and what he was doing was a thorough destruction, was what I got the sense of. Like, yeah, it was probably that a simple just
He
setting
had
off a
more
bomb or
steps he
shooting a
could have do.
blaster
Yeah.
wasn't gonna clean the thing to the extent that he needed it to.
He took the
Um,
time to like put on his like shopkeeper wig and all this stuff. Like, why didn't he
eh,
just get the hell out of there?
because he's about to take off and he wants to take off without drawing attention. And then the fact that he chose to kill himself also, to me, that's just it. Like, oh, I got burned? No, I didn't. Like, I don't know. It just again struck to me that
Yeah,
sense of
I
him
think
as this
his
like dedicated
character,
hard ass,
to me,
like
his character was too egotistical to go out like that. Like, I didn't see him. I just didn't see him letting himself.
Oh no, that ego is him
no.
winning when he stabs himself. Like you're not gonna
Yeah.
get me, and you're
But
not gonna get me
wasn't
to
like
talk.
that
That's
wasn't
his
like
ego.
public or big enough. I don't know. I feel like ego people don't do that.
I don't know. I felt like he was smart enough to know that if they actually got their hands on him, he couldn't resist them. So he was like, "Nope, you're not gonna win. You
Yep,
got me in a corner? No,
I
you
agree
don't."
with Dave.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Now,
but
I
why not
agree.
take her? Why wouldn't you at least take out some of them with you or something? You know what I mean? Like, why wasn't the
What?
shop rigged to blow?
well,
What,
he did. He did. He did. He took Dedra out because, like,
Yeah.
by
Well,
her
sure.
not being able to get the information, where did she end up?
Yeah,
And
but that's
I mean,
too.
it was a great scene, right? These two characters, finally coming head to head, and this key thing but
there's only two
know,
false items in this room. You want to guess what they are? Great line. Yeah.
right. But in real life, if I were, and it is, you usually have a destruction plan when you have a covert communications facility, right? He might have been going a little slow, but that would generally be what happened. But if you hear the doorbell ring while you're doing that, you're not going to go answer the door. You're going to go. You're going to leave. Destroy
That's
as
what
much
I'm
as you
saying.
can. You're going to leave. Second thing is, if you're Dedra, you don't ring the doorbell.
Yeah.
You bust the door down.
Well, that I didn't
she,
mind because she wanted her moment of like,
right. And they did make the point that she made a terrible mistake, and her ego caused this to, all that's great. But I'm just saying, in the real life situation, you wouldn't do that. You just wouldn't do that.
Think back to the first season when Luthen's ship gets interdicted, and he's like, he didn't just kill himself. He like had some fancy shit weaponry and like went crazy and blew up the ship or whatever, right? Like that's the kind of stuff his character should do, not just like, I'm just going to quietly stab myself after answering the door while I'm destroying all the evidence. You know, like that. I didn't like that. That didn't work for me.
Well, one thing you got to think about with Luthen's character too is that everything that Kayla does to like make sure that he's dead, that hospital attack, he trained her to do all that stuff.
That was great. That part was great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
Clea was awesome in that sequence.
well, and her, including pushing ET around the hospital, but but and you want to talk about scenes that are silly that they did say that they had her being pulled into a surgery and having it originally in the first draft of the script and realized it was too goofy. But the everything that Clea does to save him, Luthen, that's stuff he pulled off if you think about it, because he's the one that trained her and he's the one that made her possible. So in the end, everything that you're saying, Issa, in a sense, like Luthen pulled it off because he trained her to the point where she was able to do that and finish him off. And I think, I don't know. I mean, I liked all that stuff, but it was clear, especially knowing when you listen to the interviews, that was supposed to be one episode and that it was stretched into two to make up for the K2 origin story that they cut after writing and pre-visiting it. So and I think it's clear that this was supposed to be 2 episodes, but it was good stuff. And I think Luthen, I like that he's morally gray and that he just can't, but I hear you, because his escape with the ship in the first season was one of the coolest scenes.
That was badass.
That was badass. And
but think about the people in real life, if we, without saying who they are or whatever, think about the people in real life like that you've come across, and they're so egotistical. They're the only one that can save the situation, and like they can justify anything, and there's no way they're just killing themselves instead of.
Yeah, but see, I think Luthen's too smart for that. And you also saw that he's not that type of character for one line and one line only that he said to Clea as a child, when she said, "The only thing that terrifies me is what I'm doing to you." Okay. That's not a line by a character who's driven totally by ego. That's somebody who's a little more thoughtful than the person you're thinking of. And in my opinion. And that's a great line too, that Luthen has, where he says, "The only thing that I'm scared of is what I'm doing."
He didn't seem very scared of it, though,
like, well, he pushed the button on Naboo. He didn't let her do it.
Yeah, sure.
So, and then of course he still brought her into all of it. So
totally.
Yeah, but and though he wanted her to escape, she wanted to be the one to go back to the shop, and he said, "No, because that's." When it's convenient, she's his daughter, and I their relationship was great. I liked all the flashbacks. I do know that he said that the writer on it said that I don't remember his name, Tom Bissell, I think is his name, but he said that they wrote a lot more flashbacks and they just didn't use them. And that
it did seem that they came in kind of suddenly. You could kind of tell there was more.
Yeah. And Gilroy, I guess, gave him the advice. He's like, write all the flashbacks you want, because you'll use it in the background of your characters, even if you don't use it on the screen, and which writers, we know that, because a lot of times we're thinking a lot about the background. It's one of the reasons why I think one of the really good pieces of writer advice is like, know the whole history of some of your main characters, whether you're going to use it or not, because it informs so much about their character. And novelists, we get to use all that stuff, right, Alma? We get to use it. Screenwriters don't. Screenwriters don't get to use that shit. They have to put everything on the screen. So, but that is what it is. So, so she does escape, and Dedra gets arrested, and we have that great opening scene of episode 11. Who else knows?
We're still recording, Rachel. Sorry.
Yeah. Tell Rachel we're almost done.
Oh my god, I thought I muted when I did that.
No, you didn't.
I hit the little mute my microphone thing.
Yeah, well, tell Rachel we're almost done. You can tell her
Okay.
right here. So
We're almost done, Rachel. It's cool.
Sorry.
almost done. And hi, Rachel.
Please edit that out.
No, no, I actually like it. But here's the thing. So that whole scene with him putting his thumb or his fingers on her head, that was an improvisation by the actor, of course. But the interrogation of seeing Dedra get turned around after her interrogation in the first season was, I always say, my favorite storytelling is parallels and reversals. So you got a parallel and a reversal right there. So I, of course, love that. And it's hilarious to watch her still like try to help and they don't give a shit, like she's like, yeah, you can catch them. You can use this radio and you can get there. And, and then they, they're able to get Kayla off to Yavin. She doesn't want to go to Yavin because she knows that Luthen is hated there. And you see Mothma's cousin, who was a part of the Aldani heist. And, they didn't have a great relationship. So it's one of those cool things where finding her in the rain and welcoming her into the rebellion is kind of like a cleansing moment, and then there's the whole thing of, they don't want to believe Cassian because you ran and helped Luthen the first chance he called for you. And then, there's all kinds of great moments there, but then you're setting up the end, and it's an interesting finale because it's so anticlimactic for a series, but what it's doing is setting up Rogue One. And that's what you were talking about, Issa.
Totally threw me for a loop.
yeah, because, and that's why a lot of people have made memes of the Rogue One poster where they took out a Star Wars story and changed it to an Andor epilogue. And I think that's pretty funny. Yeah. And definitely they're just basically, but that's what we were going to, that's how the series was always going to end. But really the ending of the series that's different, that gives you a true ending, is seeing that Bix went back to the grain planet and had Cassian's child. And
that was I did not like that. That was
that's the hope.
No, that was not the hope. That was tragic. That was like because he didn't know. That's terrible.
Oh, that's great storytelling, though. That's great.
Oh, it was so. I thought it was so cliche, and like when you see her from behind without you came to your arms, I was like, oh, don't be holding a baby, no, because now it's like so.
It's cliche for a reason.
That Cassian died not knowing that he had a kid. That's terrible.
Yeah, well, it adds to the sacrifice. Yeah.
I thought it was
it's a risk. It worked for me.
Yeah, I liked it because it's Star Wars treating war like it's an actual war. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know, but why couldn't he have just known he had the baby, right? Then it would have been like even bigger of a sacrifice to keep going with the rebellion. I feel that would have been a much better story.
Well, I just think it adds to the tragedy.
We're going to get like in 20 years, we're going to get like the son of Andor or whatever.
Maybe.
Yeah.
They're setting up a sequel.
Well, somebody will make a disappointing Andor's son thing. Yes, you're right.
Yeah, that will probably happen. And but maybe the right person will get, maybe after doing 10 years of other stuff, Tony Gilroy will be convinced to come back and do something.
Do Andor Jr.
Yeah. and but so anything else on this last arc for you guys? And I mean, how did Alma, how did you feel about like this ending, how it set up Rogue One?
Well, we had to immediately go watch Rogue One because we wanted to see how neatly it docked. And it was perfect. It was perfect, almost down to the jacket, that he wore. It was, really remarkable. I think, as a piece of storytelling, they really did a masterful job.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was I already said this, but it was cool that Rogue One went into Star Wars the exact same way, and that was
Yeah.
really
Mm-hmm.
now you get now it's like an even longer single shot or whatever you want to call it. Like the timeline has no more room in it, except for all the years they skipped in Andor season 2.
Well, and I'm with F and Dave on the I like all the tragic stuff because and one of the things about Rogue One is that it made it like an actual war, like that had consequences and more than just, stormtroopers falling over and like and oh, and by the way, the reason why they didn't have helmets, the tactical unit that went in there, according to Tony Gilroy, they are Coruscant City tactical unit and not actual Empire. And that they are not given helmets.
Okay. They got to pay where they can, right?
Yeah, for whatever reason. But
I don't want to forget to say that Dedra in the prison was like the best of those ending scenes. Like that made me so
happy.
Yeah, that was definitely pleasing.
I think the prison part of the first season was kind of my favorite of all of Andor. So that
yeah. And I know that Andy Serkis was approached for reprising his role in season 2, and supposedly he told Tony Gilroy, like, how are we going to make a better story than that last one? So let's let it go. And that's pretty big for an actor to turn down a paycheck and like say like, hey, we did it just right. Let's let it go.
I mean, his particular story ended so beautifully. I can't swim. How could it be any better than that?
But yeah, that's one that people kept asking Tony Gilroy, like in interviews, like, did you ever want to bring him back? And he said at one point, he's like, yeah, I approached Andy. He thought it was perfect the way it was. And one of the things that's cool about Tony Gilroy's interviews is that he will be brutally honest about like the mechanics of like production, or he'll just be like, yeah, just like couldn't get that guy back, and it just didn't make sense. And like, he'd talk about like, well, if I have that person for this amount of days, and originally he arced out 5 seasons, but he and Diego Luna had a conversation where they were filming season 1 and they were like, we can't do this for that many years. It won't work. And so that's when they kind of rejiggered it for 2 seasons. And, the production design being by the guy who did Chernobyl, like gave it that, kind of more realistic look and all that too. But yeah, all those interviews with the Gilroys. And so the podcast that interviewed every single one of the writers is the Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith. So if people want to find those interviews, I listened to every single one of them. They're very good. There's all kinds of storytelling advice that's in there. And they talk about their process of how they wrote it. It's very good. So and as for me, the book ending, I watched Rogue One last night. I've watched Rogue One many, many times. So, but I think for me, the moment where he's like, Galen Erso, when he has that reaction, it makes it so much better. Definitely the Rebellions Are Built on Hope was probably the best thing that I think, that coming from just that bellboy at the hotel, is one of my favorite things that of those two working together. And Rogue One, I think a lot of people have objected to the change of pace, but I think that makes sense because I like that it's like the slow build and then here's like the crazy thing that we had to jump into. And so for me, that's what it works. But I've kept you guys here for 2 hours. So, and Alma, it's late. You're on the East Coast. So, and Dave, you're in Chicago, so it's pretty late for you too. But
no, not that late, but yeah.
Yeah. So overall, like, now that this is a complete experience, and it's funny too, because Issa and I, for a little while, we tried to, out of desire to write Star Wars and actually have a friend who's involved in it. We kind of kicked around an idea for a Star Wars project, and what we wanted to do was, and what I would like to see Star Wars do coming out of Andor, and call us Disney, is I would like to find something that balances the mythology of the Force centric Star Wars with the real life from below storytelling, and find something that's not all or one, that kind of finds a balance in the middle. And that's kind of like the thing that Issa and I worked on for a little bit. Like, we were trying to find something,
Well,
a story that balances that. But that's what I would like to see. Do you guys have anything you would like to see else coming out of Star Wars, Dave?
well, I was just gonna say my pessimist take is that they tried that with The Last Jedi and it was brutally rejected by a huge chunk of the fan base. Um,
That's true.
so
That was they tried having a woman in the movie. Like totally
right, but
different.
also like one of the
But the
things I
fan
loved
base
about,
got it.
well, that's absolutely the case. Yeah, the reactionary misogynists are essentially the worst part of it, and various fascist sympathizers and such. But like, also though, one of the things I love that I heard people complain, like people who didn't like the kid using the Force at the very end and stuff. I was like, again, it was that thing I want always want Star Wars to do. Open up your world. Like,
Yeah.
get creative, tell other stories. Please stop this hero's journey stuff. It doesn't have to just be about Skywalkers, like
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and Ray taking the Skywalker name is one of the
Oh,
most
that is
brutal,
so stupid.
stupidest
Yeah.
storytelling choices in the. Yeah, yeah. Don't get me started.
That didn't bother me so much. I kind of felt like that was par for the course or whatever. That was fine.
Yeah.
Different podcast, whatever.
Different podcast.
Yeah,
But
sure.
um, Alma, what could bring you back to Star Wars? What would you? Is there anything you'd like to see, like this
Geez, you know,
universe?
I don't know the world enough to say, right? Andor was sort of serendipitous find for me, and it is amazing. I'm going to go back and study those scripts and really think about how we ended up, constructing, especially season two, because I'm always trying to learn from screenwriters, even though I don't, write for the screen myself. I think it's just like a really great lesson for storytellers there. So no, at this point, no, I'm not envisioning,
Well,
what
I gotta say, Alma, as a woman with a spycraft experience, writing a Clea novel for the Star Wars universe,
Mm.
yeah, I, I think I think somebody at Lucasfilm should get a hold of Alma's agent. So, and I would love to see a Clea novel written by Alma Katsu. I'm just saying.
that really sounds like a lot of fun. So yeah, if anyone out there is listening, go ahead and call my agent.
Yeah. And Issa, is there anything you want to see from the Star
I
Wars
mean, I
universe?
have my heart set on Andor Jr. now. I'm waiting until the baby grows up and we can see another story. I'm excited.
Andor babies.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, why
Hey,
wait?
Andor's the right
We
age
got to
for
see
the
Anakin when he was
Mandalorian.
like 7 years old or whatever. So,
And Andor Jr. is the right age for the Mandalorian universe, right? So,
totally. And maybe he could be a pod racer. I don't know. It could be awesome.
Or he could be a student activist if you want to go for the more
There you
like
go.
gritty Andor
Like
style. Yeah.
kindergarten activist for sure.
yeah, and uh, for me, like I'm actually a big fan of Ahsoka, and I'm actually really excited
Hmm.
that they're filming Ahsoka season 2 right now. So, and
Too
but
bad the actor playing the coolest part of the show died.
Yeah.
yeah, the Balin Skull is the character. Yeah, yeah, he was very good in the show, but the recasting didn't look too bad to me. But
Okay.
I, you know, I even like the Acolyte, which I will say this for people: if you watch the Acolyte, it's the one set in the High Republic.
Yeah.
The first couple episodes are super rough.
I gotta
But it
say,
gets
if you're
better.
no,
I like
I
it.
watched it, and this is when I was like talking about not being serious fan. Like, I don't follow any fan reactions to this stuff, so I just watched The Acolyte and thought that was good, especially by the end. I
Yeah.
really, and in particular, I loved the villain.
The villain is
Like,
great in the Acolyte, and
really, really good. And one who makes like the Sith and the dark side seem so much more like interesting and compelling and believable beyond just like these dudes who have power fantasies. Um, so
Mhm.
cool.
Yeah.
Like, really, really cool. Yeah.
And episode 5 of the Acolyte has the best lightsaber fight outside of
Oh
the
yeah,
main.
there are
Incredible, because
definitely
they
some
went Hong Kong
incredible.
style for the fights,
Yeah.
and it's obvious. Yeah. So I would definitely say the first couple episodes, the storytelling is a little rough, but it gets better. And so, and Skeleton Crew, if the whole like Amblin Star Wars thing, I do think people should check it out, because sort of people are saying like, I just came here for Andor. I don't give a shit about the rest of Star Wars. There is some good storytelling going on. There's some of it, and you should definitely. And Rebels, as goofy as it does connect to all the events, and it's funny because one of the podcasts or one of the video shows that I watched, the Screen Crush, Ryan Airy, that does the breakdowns, the Easter eggs, that he did a really good job of one of the episodes for Andor of showing how the timeline matches up between Rebels and Andor with like 4 BBY and all that. And it's they do it. I think Gilroy took seriously that the cartoon is a part of the history, and you are going closer to the dark side, F and Dave, with the
Yeah.
as we go. All right, so
Funny and helpful.
Alma, where can people find your work?
Oh, well, hopefully everywhere. If you want to check me out, go to my website, which is my name, Alma Katsu, and books, almakatsubooks.com.
Yeah, and you also have a really great historical horror novel about Japanese internment camps.
Thank you. The
Fervor.
Fervor. Yeah.
Was one of I really really like that one a lot.
Thank you.
So people should definitely check out all your work. And I loved Red Widow; it's very good. And I'm really excited to see what you got going on with Fiend. I haven't gotten there yet. I'm working on that. Issa, you don't want people to find you.
There's no reason to find me. But Alma, it was nice meeting you, and I will go read your books.
Oh, thank you. Nice meeting you too.
And F and Dave, do you
I mean,
you got things going on, right?
yeah, I mean, it's boring technical professional stuff. I think probably the thing of most appeal to you all, although still, I had a book come out this year that I co-edited about radical independent publishing in Latin America, called Comunidad Letrada, Lettered Community. It is an inside joke for Latin American studies nerds, the title. Based a very influential book called The Lettered City, Ciudad Letrada. So we played off of, instead of the lettered city, the lettered community. Anyway, so if you're interested in a book written for librarians about how you get track down unusual publications from Latin America, you can track that down. But otherwise, no, I tend to
I'm
keep.
an archive nerd, so I am actually interested in that.
Okay, like you might recognize a lot of it because it's more like trying to tell librarians how we would track down obscure records or something at a festival. Um,
Yeah, when I
does
had
that make any sense? Like it's Latin American publishing as punk rock fest. Might be the way oversimplified, silly version of it.
yeah, and it's funny because I had Alec Neville Ali on recently on our Dickheads Live thing, and I wondered how much, because we started like nerding out about like digging in archives and finding these things, and I'm like, I don't know how much people like. To us, it's like Indiana Jones shit when you find like
Oh yeah.
a manuscript, and you know it's. But I'll tell you, there's nothing like my experience that I had holding the original manuscript for Dune straight from the typewriter with Frank Herbert's red pen writing on it. It's like when you see the stuff that he cut and all that stuff. Man, archiving is fucking cool. You can find that shit. It is awesome. So I'm all here for it, Dave. I love that you do that stuff. I love that you found a career in it. It's awesome. On that note, folks, I think the next big panel that I'm going to be, Issa and I will be back with Star Trek Strange New Worlds is coming back in June. So we cover all the Star Trek seasons when they're over. We skipped the last of Lower Decks, which would have to watch again, so I'm not going to do it.
I think I might like Lower Decks more than you will.
Yeah, well, I like Lower Decks okay, but I had that whole thing of like the comedy fast-paced talk drove me crazy in Star Trek, but it just didn't feel like Star Trek to me, but I don't want to go there. Anyways, folks, I will be back with more episodes soon. Sorry there's been less episodes, but I think this novel is going to turn out great, and I hope that you'll get it. And the book is a sequel to The Last Night to Kill Nazis, which is available nationwide at Barnes and Nobles in the horror section. So please help me get to a 7th printing before the sequel. And but I promise the sequel has U-boats and mummies. U-boats and mummies. What more? Yeah. And double agents. It's coming. So on that note, folks, I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate the panel, everybody coming out and talking about Andor. This should be out later this week. So as always, folks, buy stuff out there and like and subscribe, all that stuff, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.